right, or at least it's going live. I pressed the button there. There we go. Hey there, students. Tom Richey here for some APUSH review. All right, so we're going to be focusing tonight on the 20th century. Hey, Chad and JD and Alexio and Jacob. All right, so we've got, just a couple nights left. We're going to be broadcasting this evening. We're going to be broadcasting tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, okay? So, again, we're going to be focusing on the 20th century. I want to wish everybody a happy May the 4th, all right? And I tell you what, did y'all see that trailer? How many of y'all saw that trailer for the Obi-Wan Kenobi show? Like, wow, okay, like I am totally stoked. That second trailer, I mean, it was just anybody like Uncle Owen had a mic drop moment on that trailer. It was like, whoa, he just said that. All right, so as far as that goes, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. And so with that, where he's just like, hey, when it comes time, the boy must be trained like he trained his father. Oh, it was like that super hot fire like meme where everybody's like, oh, so yeah, May the 4th be with y'all. So let's go ahead and note, ladies and gentlemen, first with a word from our sponsor, Romulus A Push Review, okay, which is a little trivia app that I think will be helpful for y'all in preparing. You can pick any topic and it'll just ask you a series of questions, okay, where you would say, oh, those are the intolerable acts. It's going to help nourish those connections in your brain so that when you're writing those DBQs and LEQs, you are not in a situation where you are where you're struggling, okay, where you're like, wait, I can't remember that, okay? So a lot of times people are like, oh, I just don't remember what it's called. Well, this will help you, Romulus A Push Review. Also, I want to note that we're going tomorrow night. Now, this is not for everyone, okay? I'm going to say this is not for everyone. This is tomorrow night at 11 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to have a fireside chat. That's going to be limited to 30 people. This really should be those of you who live on the West Coast, or there are some of you here on the East Coast, you're not going to go to bed anyway. Sometimes I find that when people do the fireside chat and they can ask their questions at 11 p.m., maybe they'll go to bed at 12:30 or 1 o'clock instead of staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning, okay? Now, that is a premium session that's going to be available only to, that's going to be 30 people tops. It's not for everybody. I'll go ahead and share some links there, okay? So we're going to note here, fireside chat on Thursday at 11 p.m. Eastern. Now, again, this is not for everybody. I would recommend if you're on the East Coast, go to bed. Okay, that's my biggest recommendation. Hey, Mia and Clark, I'm trying my best. So as far as that goes, just understand that the fireside chat, it's going to be a small group thing. Let's see, fireside chat, and that's, the little link there. So just know that that's happening. I'm going to be doing a very small group fireside chat. You do need to go to sleep. I think you need to sleep, but at the same time, I know some of you aren't going to. And if you have a small group session, ask a few questions, you might feel a little better and go to bed. That's actually the last part of those fireside chats I do. I'm just telling people, hey, now it's time to go to bed. All right, go to bed. All right, so with that, now the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, this exam is not comprehensive, okay? Everything is not going to show up on the exam. So when I get questions like this, what topics and events are most important to know for this period? I don't answer these questions, okay, because they're not specific, okay? So with that, Kaylee, you're asking, can we briefly go over immigration laws and the lives of immigrants, okay? That's a good question, okay? Like we think about, all right, let's go ahead and think about immigration. Now, if you Google APUSH Immigration Review, you're going to see a link to my website here, and I'm going to go ahead and share this immigration handout from my website, okay? So what I did here is I created a thematic handout on immigration, and we're going to see, that's going to the APUSH homepage. All right, so click here, immigration review notes. So I'm going to go ahead and share these in the chats. All right, so let me go ahead and run over here, and we are going to put that out there. All right, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would say somebody's asking, is it hard to get a 2? I don't think it's that hard to get a 2. Like typically a 1 on the exam, this is for people who like you really have to not care in order to make a 1, okay? Like if you make a 2, at least this is something that you knew something, you made some sort of effort. Like I tell students all the time, like, you know, if you make a 2 on the exam, my actual students, that, you know, we can still look at each other when we pass. But if you make a 1, it's one of those things. It's just kind of like, really, did you not do anything at all during the year? Now there was one student that actually he took AP Euro with me, and then he took APUSH with me. He made a 1 on both of them, and I'm like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. You know, this kid had the audacity one time to like come into my room after that, and he asked me to buy something for a fundraiser, and I was like, no, you know, just not, you know, just I'm not buying anything from you. So with that, you know, just to let y'all know that it's like, yeah, when you think about now, actually, yeah, so about half of the students who pass this exam, I mean, take this exam, pass it. But you know, a 2, it shows that you at least did something, okay? You at least did something, and you tried and you made an effort, okay? So as far as this goes, what I shared with you, I go back all the way to the Bering Land Bridge. And then go to colonization. Now, note here that traditional American immigration is coming from, you know, Northern and Western Europe, okay? So Northwestern Europe, and is overwhelmingly Protestant. Now, note that in the colonial period and in the early national period, during both these periods, about 300,000 African slaves are brought in voluntarily to North America. So then you go to the antebellum period. Now, this also covers internal migration. So I go into the Anglo-American settlers in Texas, the 1830 Indian Removal Act. Then we've got our first wave of Catholic immigration in the 1830s with this wave of Irish and German immigration. For those of you who took AP Euro, you remember the Irish potato famine, okay? And you remember also the revolutions of you know, with the revolutions of 1848. And so as far as you know, as far as that goes, you know, this is something that, you know, is going on. So the Wild West Chinese Exclusion Act. So when we look at the turn of the 20th century, okay, so the progressive era, this is where we see the so-called new immigrants. They're not so new anymore. Like if you're a Greek American or Italian American or a Jewish American, odds are now your family has been here for at least 3 or 4 generations, if not 5 for y'all, right? But with that, you know, the new immigrants, they're coming from these areas in Southern and Eastern Europe. Now, like the Irish, they are predominantly Catholic, of course, not just Catholics, but also Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, and Jewish immigration. These are large waves of non-Protestant immigrations from, you know, immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe. Immigrations. Okay, so what we want to note here is they didn't get a particularly warm welcome. They didn't speak English, had little experience with Republican institutions, and often lacked education and job skills. Now, as far as addressing some of these things, that's where you have the settlement house movement. Now, test makers love Jane Addams. Okay, Jane Addams, who was a progressive era reformer, and she founded the Hull House in Chicago. So Chicago was a city with a lot of immigrants. And so she's basically like, you know, let's work on some job skills. Let's have English classes. Let's help you to acculturate. And also she was hoping, you know, through making sure that these immigrants had job skills, the ability to speak the English language, she was trying to undermine political machines, okay? Because these political machines, when you think about the Tweed Ring and some of these other machines, what they would do is immigrants would come in and they would say, hey, we're going to help you find a place to live. We're going to help you find a job. We're going to help give you a sense of community. And then when it's time to vote, we're going to give you the Democratic ticket and you are going to go in, you're going to vote that ticket. And so that's what we see, like Jane Addams is trying to undermine that. and try to help immigrants become acculturated so that they don't have to be beholden to the political machines. Remember, that's a big part of the progressive era, is to try to, bring politics into a true democracy and away from these, from the machine politics. Now, also, we want to note that the first Red Scare, this is something that follows World War I, and this is something that's also tied to immigration. Okay, so basically, when the Bolsheviks take over in Russia, all of a sudden communism is more than just a scary idea. This is something that's actually like they have taken over a major country, and what's to stop them from doing that in the United States? And where are these recent immigrants coming from? Eastern Europe. That's the same place communism is. And so the government is like, look, we need to focus on these radical immigrants, either getting them out of here, like with the Palmer raids, or trying to keep them out of the country in general. Okay, now this is also, when we think about internal migrations, World War I, during and after World War I, you have the Great Migration, okay? And so the Great Migration of Black Americans from the South happens partly because of because of job opportunities that show up in northern cities during World War I. As young men are going off to war, there are job opportunities to work for the railroads, work in the steel mills. And so Black Americans start leaving the South, and they want these economic and educational opportunities. Also to escape lynchings. Y'all remember Ida B. Wells, okay? So when we're thinking about muckrakers, Ida B. Wells. Now, there is also Ida Tarbell, who was another muckraker who wrote about the Standard Oil Company. But Ida B. Wells, sometimes referred to as Ida B. Wells Barnett, she was an investigative journalist, a kind of muckraker. Remember, muckrakers, they are exposing corruption and evil, whether it is in society, whether it's in big business, whether it's in the government. And so she was documenting lynchings at the turn of the 20th century. She wrote a few books here, Southern Horrors, Lynch Law in All of Its Phases. Okay, so Ida B. Wells is a good person to know as we're looking at, some of these things with race relations at the turn of the 20th century. So we see here some very brutal race riots in Chicago and other cities. Now, when we see these radical immigrants, the new immigrants in general, the Black migrants, you see that the North especially is becoming, more Jewish, more Catholic, and more Black. And this is something that's leading to the organization of the Second Ku Klux Klan, which did exist in the South. Now, remember, the first Ku Klux Klan existed only in the South during Radical Reconstruction. The second Ku Klux Klan is inspired by this silent film. The highest grossing silent film ever was a 1915 film, Birth of a Nation. Okay, so Birth of a Nation, this was a movie, about a 3-hour silent film about the Civil War and Reconstruction, also originally called The Klansman. And so basically it made the first Ku Klux Klan look heroic and also a lot more organized than it was. Like, you see that this guy's got an actual uniform and all of that, where really the first Ku Klux Klan looks a lot more like what you saw if you ever saw that movie Django, with the guys with the pillowcases on their heads. Okay, and so going from that, that's where then in the 1920s, you see the response to mass immigration during the progressive era, and they passed the first Immigration Quota Acts. And so this is where, like before the Immigration Quota Acts in the 1920s, the only prohibition of immigration, or really any regulation, was the Chinese Exclusion Act that was passed, in the 1880s. So basically, in the 1920s, you have the first system of controlled immigration. Okay, now as far as that goes, too, the 1920s laws, they gave preference to immigrants from Northern and Western Europe. Basically, when they did the national quotas, they went back to the year 1890. which is before you started seeing mass immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. And so the 1920s Immigration Acts gave preference to people of Northern and Western European origin. And so also the Sacco and Vanzetti trial is always a good specific example when you're thinking about nativism. Sacco and Vanzetti, basically, they were Italian Americans, and they were accused of murder and armed robbery. They were Italian immigrants. They were anarchists, so they had ties to radicalism, and they were accused of a crime, okay, which for the jury, that seemed to be enough. Now, when you look at the evidence, it's like, they might have done it, or one of them might have done it, but that's not why you send someone to the electric chair. That the standard for our jurisprudence is beyond a reasonable doubt. So the Italian American community believed that Sacco and Vanzetti did not get a fair trial. And so, and they demonstrated for that. Their funeral procession was very well attended. Now, contemporary America, we want to note the migration to the Sunbelt. Okay, so when we look at the Sunbelt, this is something that is basically, this is from the Carolinas to California. I live in the Sunbelt. Okay, and this is really, there are actually some historians that say that really and truly Reconstruction ended after World War II. Like, this is the first time where you start to see, I mean, the South is still today, like if we were going to look at, per capita GDP by state in the US, if we were looking like, GDP per capita, list of states and territories by GDP, we see here that, as far as that goes, now let's see, GDP per capita. You notice that a lot of the poorer states are still in the South, but it's not as pronounced as it would have been at one point. Okay, so when we look at the per capita GDP, you still see that the South is, not the same kind of per capita GDP that you see in the Northeast, that you see on the West Coast. But as far as that goes, you do start to see a great bit of migration to the South. Okay, now part of this is air conditioning. Okay, which air conditioning is something that is now making the South livable. The summers here get kind of hot. Okay, and then Florida especially has boomed. Okay, so when you think about Florida, Texas, and California, these states have especially boomed. Like the 1948 presidential election, if we go back there, now this is also, World War II is kind of a turning point here, that Truman in 1948, Harry Truman in the midst of the campaign season. Now FDR was somebody who was, FDR was somebody who, was very mindful of his coalition. While he made sure that Black Americans had access to the benefits given by New Deal programs, FDR never upset the apple cart by calling for an end to segregation or by calling for federal civil rights legislation or anything like that. Okay, so Truman in 1948, in the midst of the campaign, Truman signed an executive order desegregating the armed forces. He decided, that's the right thing to do. That's Truman. The buck stops here. Most politicians, most people who have been president, they would do that after an election, not in the middle of an election. But Truman, he thought it was the right thing to do, so he desegregated the armed forces. He's challenged by Strom Thurmond, a senator from South Carolina, in the so-called Dixiecrat Party. So we see that Truman, loses votes from these 4 states in the Deep South. Now, another thing that I want to note here, though, is let's take a look at the country. So we do see the solid South beginning to fall apart after World War II as the Democratic Party starts to take positions in favor of desegregation and federal civil rights legislation. But as far as this goes, note that in 1948, Florida had 8 electoral votes. There were no more people in Florida than there were in South Carolina or in West Virginia. Texas and California, 23 and 25 electoral votes respectively. Now we see that California and Texas, they are smaller than Illinois, smaller than Pennsylvania, smaller than New York, the same size as Ohio. You know, California and Ohio are the same size. So we note here that after World War II, the population center of the United States was still in the Midwest and in the Northeast. Now, if we start to go here to, you know, if we were to go to 2000, you know, let's see, so, you know, 2016, for example, you know, that's going to be where we see now Florida with 29. Florida and New York are the same size. Florida is larger than Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Illinois. Texas, you know, has 38 electoral votes, and California with 55. Now, as far as that goes, you see that, you know, this Sunbelt migration. And then we're seeing here that the Midwest, today, the Midwest is sometimes called on the electoral map the Rust Belt, okay, because this is where American industry used to, you know, used to thrive and doesn't anymore. Over time, you see these states, you know, if we go back to like, you know, 1996, let's see, 1996, and we see here that, you know, these states are progressively losing electoral votes while the states in the Sun Belt are gaining electoral votes. So, you know, for example, you see when you look at Ohio and South Carolina, for example, if we go up to, you know, let's see, 2012, you know, 2012 presidential election, we've got South Carolina with 8, and then we've got Ohio with 21. We look at a couple censuses later, South Carolina with 9, Ohio with 18. Okay, so you see this Sun Belt migration that is taking over. Now, another thing we want to think about is globalization. When I'm looking through recent exams, I'm seeing questions about globalization. So the Sun Belt, you know, this is something that is, you know, that is people are, you know, coming into the South. Now, part of that too is if we look at, you know, right to work states, okay, if we look at right to work states in the United States, this was created by the Taft-Hartley Act, which was a piece of labor legislation that was passed by Congress. It actually, you know, was passed over Harry Truman's veto. Now, during the New Deal, there was the, you know, the Wagner Act, or National Labor Relations Act, that was passed in 1937. That resulted in a significant increase in membership in labor unions. Now, after World War II, there was a series of strikes and there was public outcry. Can you do something about these strikes? And so the Taft-Hartley Act, it allowed states to pass laws that could basically, the states cannot say that you can't have labor unions, but the states can pass laws saying that someone can't be forced to join a labor union. You can't have what's called closed shop. So in these states now, Midwestern states have started to pass these laws more recently, but you see here Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, you know, you see that the South, you know, southern states are some of the first states to pass these laws. So North Carolina, you see that South Carolina in the 1950s, Tennessee in 1947, and Texas in 1947, and Virginia. And so what you're seeing here is basically the entire South is, you know, is set up to where the unions can't run the show. Okay. And so what you're seeing there is companies, you know, you've got partly air conditioning, but partly, you know, companies are saying, well, if I build my plant in the South, I don't have to collectively bargain with labor unions. Okay, so you see that the Southern economy starts to, you know, starts to get a lot more manufacturing jobs coming to it because of that. And so the other thing, though, it's not just right to work laws. When we think about globalization, if we look at the, you know, the tariff history, of the United States, when we're looking at this, we can see that after World War II, we see tariffs go to a to a record low level. Okay, so you see that as a result of globalization, this is where, now after the Civil War and Reconstruction, you see that the textile industry moves to the South. Like as late as the 1980s, South Carolina still had a pretty vibrant textile industry, but that has moved. Instead of buying, your clothes that were, the textiles were manufactured in South Carolina. Instead of that, you're looking at, Indonesia, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, countries like this that are their textile industries are growing. That is globalization. The textile industries follow the cheap labor. So the United States has less of a manufacturing economy and has moved more toward a consumer, and service economy rather than predominantly a manufacturing economy. So that we see that tariffs have gone down, union membership has gone down, and trade, global trade has gone up. As a result of globalization. And of course, there's been some pushback. Definitely you have seen that the middle class controls a bit less of the national wealth than it did a few decades back. And so with that, as we're looking at immigration and internal migrations, the Sunbelt, that's what we're seeing here after World War II. And so, basically air conditioning, a nice warm climate, combined with air conditioning, our winters are not very harsh over here, and often less regulated labor. So the 1965 Immigration Act. Now we want to put that in context. 1965, that's the same time that you're seeing, remember the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Civil Rights Act. So an Immigration Act is passed in 1965, and it modifies national origins quotas. Like now, you see that immigration from the developing world is being welcomed. So from Asia, Africa, the Middle East. And so for the first time in the 1965 Immigration Act, our immigration laws don't give preference for white immigrants. Okay, and so as far as that goes, in the 1965 Act, we start to see an emphasis on specialized job skills. Okay, so as far as that goes, no more specialized, like as far as, immigrants, like, as late as like the turn of the 20th century tended to be unskilled. Okay, so as far as that, goes, that we start to see now, a lot of our immigrants are skilled. A lot of our immigrants are doctors and chemists and other skilled professions because they applied for jobs in the United States, and they're given immigration visas based on their specialized skills. So we want to note that in the contemporary period, post World War II, that we're seeing more immigrants that are highly skilled. And also we want to note that immigration from Latin America has increased significantly, and people of Hispanic and Latino descent making up, at least as of a few years ago, 17% of the population, with the majority being born in the United States. So the majority of Hispanic and Latino Americans were born here in the United States. And then most recently, the 1965 Immigration Act, although it eliminated racial discrimination, there were still restrictions based on someone's sexual orientation that the Immigration Act of 1990 removed. At the very beginning of the movie Scarface, they ask him, point blank, if he's a homosexual, and this was something that was that was in the questions that they were asking people who were trying to immigrate to the United States. And, if you didn't say no to that question, that invalidated your entry into the United States. So as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and, continue continue going here. And so yeah, I think that we've covered a lot of that. Those are some great things. All right, so what are the most important takeaways from the world wars? Okay, Aaron is asking about the world wars. Okay, so we'll get from there. Let me see if we've got every once in a while I'll check the YouTube chat, see if we've got anybody out there. So takeaways from the world wars. Now, one thing I'm going to note here is, let me look up some tutoring notes here on that. Let's see, the Cold War and Contemporary America notes. Okay, let me go ahead and share these with y'all. This is basically like 8 pages of tutoring notes that I've come up with. So when we go into the legacies of the world wars, let me go ahead and share that. Okay, so this is a post-war handout here. And so now going here to the YouTube chat. All right, so I'm going to put that out there. And let's see. So with that, all right. So we've got this is Oompa Bill. Happy you caught the live stream. I'm happy you caught it as well. And so as far as that goes, let me go into these notes that I've just shared with y'all. Something of a, I didn't call this one a quote unquote cheat sheet, but it's a nice little study guide here, and it might have been helpful to someone taking the exam back in 2020 with the where the cheat sheets were legal. But this is just some tutoring notes here going over this. That one of the things that we would note is both world wars were followed by Red Scares. Okay, so you've got the first Red Scare coming immediately after World War I, the second Red Scare coming immediately after World War II. And just like I usually do, I'll be doing some Instagram shout outs before the conclusion of this broadcast. Okay, so as far as that goes, let's see, I'm going to be going into here and seeing, like, we've got Kayla Wheatley and Sam Alamillo, who are, recent Instagram followers. Thank you for your support. So with that, there's a Red Scare. So both of them are, you have, Americans are fearing a communist takeover of the United States. Now, I mentioned as well, both of them are punctuated by labor strikes, where labor unions, they toned down their strikes during the war, but then after the war's over, they make up for lost time. Now, another thing that we'll note here is the United States, after World War I, they embraced a unilateral foreign policy. The United States did not join the League of Nations. Now, I'm a critic of the term isolationism, especially for 1920s foreign policy. When you look at the Washington Naval Conference, the Dawes Plan, the Kellogg-Briand Pact, the United States was definitely very active in promoting peace in Europe and the world. But the United States did it unilaterally. Okay, so basically, continuing like Washington's advice. Remember, George Washington's Neutrality Proclamation and Farewell Address can make good contextualization for virtually like any foreign policy topic, especially if that is, World War. If it's before World War II. And so after World War II, we see